Here's how the argument goes, and we've heard this from several sources over the years. Stop me if you've heard this before. Scott Walker proposes budgets that he knows won't fund county government, but has the luxury of a county board of supervisors that will fix the budget so the county can operate. And if Scott Walker were true to his principles, he would have, in subsequent years, proposed budgets that use the same bottom line figure he proposed in the first budget. Because he doesn't, however, he can keep his no new taxes pledge, although he has actually proposed budgets that increase spending year after year. Another way of saying that you have your cake and eat it too. Your thoughts on this argument and how this dynamic would change if you are the chief state executive with perhaps not enough support in your legislature there either.
Well, as you know, there's a big difference between property taxes and income tax and sales tax rates. Property taxes have to go up where people don't get revenue. States can actually get more revenue just by a healthy economy without ever touching the income tax or the sales tax rate in those states. So in terms of the latter part, a big difference. But be mindful, and people, everybody else who looks out as detractors love to attribute different things to what I've said along the way. You all have heard me here, right in this room, even 8 years ago, talking about what my pledge was. My pledge was not to raise the property tax levy from the previous year. For starters, I stand by every budget I presented and would gladly, if I could begin from where I started in 2002 and have kept that tax levy the same each year, I believe it would have forced the county board to go along with some of the even more aggressive innovations we put in along the way, some of which they finally agreed to in terms of wage and benefit reforms in this last budget, ultimately out of necessity. But I have no problem backing any of the 8 budgets I presented. Having said that, though, the reason I made the pledge to not raise the property tax levy from the previous year wasn't based just upon what that tax levy amount was in 2002 and that magically was the right number, but rather on the impact it made on local property taxpayers. I'll give you an example. I still get a kick out of thinking about my first year in office in December 2002. I got a Christmas card from a guy named Bob Bitters, 80-plus-year-old guy from the southwest side of Milwaukee County, and inside the card he'd made a copy of his property tax bill. And he said, "Thanks, Scott, I still believe in Santa." And the only thing that went down on his tax bill was the county. He had circled it and put a notation next to it. Now, that's because that first year we got largely through what we wanted. The reason I made a pledge was for guys like him, and not just him, but young families still starting out on a relatively fixed income, retirees and others, saying there's a lot of people now more than even then, who are living in these tough economic times who can't afford to have 6 or 7 or 8 or 9% increases in their tax levy. They're barely getting by right now.
So you're saying the budgets, the 8 budgets you have proposed, if they had been adopted, would fund the county services, and the county wouldn't have suffered.
Well, I said in the end we will have made fundamental changes. For me, my pledge was not to raise that levy from the previous year. I kept that pledge every year just like I promised. And I said if the county board had go along with that, every year we would have continued to make proposals that would have helped us to do that in a way that minimized the impact.
Why not the same bottom line figure at each budget?
Because you have to build off of it. Well, one, most importantly, because that's not the pledge I made. The pledge I made was not to raise them from the previous year. So if people are going to judge me about promises I'm making the same way they're going to judge Mark Newman and Tom Barrett, which I've got a few things to say about the mayor because he's made promises he didn't even come close to keeping. I think that's an important distinction because you have to say, what are people promising? Not what's hypothetically, but what exactly are they promising? We've kept every one of those promises. And the other part of that equation is it takes building off the reforms. If the county board doesn't go along with the reforms I passed last year, that would have got us to a point where we could have balanced the budget without devastating the impacts of county services in the areas where it is important. If they continue not to do that, just going back to that amount without the benefit of the changes you proposed the year before doesn't have the same impact as if they'd passed the budgets the way you proposed along the way. For us, and it really ties in with the state budget, because in the end, the things I'm proposing about changes things like what state workers give in terms of a contribution to the employee portion of the state pension system, that sort of a change, or the number of workers that are working for the state if we eliminate the 4,000 vacant but funded position, or future changes when it comes to health care and how we assess those benefit costs, those are all things that not only balance your budget now, or in this coming budget, but they help balance future budgets. Because one of the biggest things, I'm sure you guys agree, I think you commented on this before, is Republican or Democrat, there have been too many years of people kicking the can into the future and not fessing up to the challenges we face. The structural changes we're talking about as governor are things we want to make in that first budget. And if we do, just like the structural changes I proposed over the years, would put us in a better place to balance future budgets.